Ow don't always see the end coming. Sometimes it doesn't arrive with shouting or betrayal so sharp it draws blood. Sometimes it comes wrapped in paperwork slid across a polished conference table with someone saying, "We need hungrier talent who can meet higher targets." That was the line Gavin Reyes gave me as he pushed the termination letter toward me. My name is Ethan Ward. I was 41 years old, and I'd spent 11 years as a senior client director at Orion Strategies in Charlotte, North Carolina. I wasn't the flashiest or the loudest, but my client portfolio. It brought in almost 45% of the firm's total revenue. Real numbers. Quiet consistency. No scandals, no complaints, no drama. And now I was being pushed out. Gavin had only been around for 6 months. He showed up with sleek haircuts, tailored suits, and buzzwords that sounded like they came straight from some overpriced consultant. I'd seen his type before, all polish, no substance. He never once joined me on a client call. Not even when I onboarded Barrett Corp, the deal that had saved Orion during the last fiscal dip. 3 weeks into his tenure, he rewrote the commission structure. My earnings dropped by nearly 22% despite no decline in performance. Subtle things followed. My office was relocated during renovations. My name quietly disappeared from certain calendar invites. Expense reports returned with comments they'd never had before. Nina, my executive assistant for 6 years, was reassigned with no notice. Death by 1,000 cuts. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I believed in my work, in the clients who trusted me, in the promise of loyalty. But as I sat there across from Gavin with the company's legal counsel watching silently from the corner, I realized something I should have known earlier. Loyalty in corporate America is a one-way street. I didn't argue, didn't plead, I just nodded. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, and meant none of it. I packed my years into a single cardboard box. A chipped coffee mug Clara gave me on our 10th anniversary. A photo of our daughter at her ballet recital, the one I almost missed because a client needed a last-minute quarterly review. A thumb drive with my own contact list, not the official database, but the one I built over late-night drinks, impromptu site visits, and holiday calls that nobody billed for. On the elevator down, I ran into Howard Langston, Orion's CEO. He looked up from his phone just long enough to nod. He had no idea what Gavin had just done. Or maybe he did. Either way, he wouldn't understand what that decision would cost them. I drove home in silence. No music, no calls, just the hum of the tires and the weight of finality. At home, the quiet was deafening. Clara was in Atlanta helping her sister with a newborn. Our daughter was staying with a friend that night. It was just me, the cardboard box, and the realization that 11 years had just been erased with a signature. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat at the kitchen table. No rage, just clarity. Gavin didn't just fire an employee today. He severed the one connection Orion Strategies had to over $18 million in recurring revenue, much of which lived in relationships I had personally cultivated. I scrolled through my phone. Logan Barrett, James Holloway, Monica Carter, Victor Ramos. Over 200 names. CFOs, COOs, decision makers. People who knew me not because of some brochure or press release, but because I had shown up. Because I'd taken their calls at 11 p.m., because I remembered their kid's graduation or quietly rescheduled a vacation to help them prep for a board presentation. I thought about calling them all. I didn't. Not yet. I'd always believed in doing things the right way. But the right way doesn't mean doing nothing. It just means doing the right thing at the right time. And Gavin had just freed me to choose that time on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm for the first time in years. No early meetings, no performance dashboards, just silence and the faint smell of the coffee I made for myself. Then I made 3 phone calls. That was it. The first was to Logan. "Logan, it's Ethan. Just wanted to let you know I'm no longer with Orion, as of yesterday." A pause. Then, "What happened? Who's taking over the account?" "I don't know. Maybe Gavin. Or someone named Carmen Patel. That the young woman from the last meeting." "Yeah. She doesn't know our business." "I know. I just wanted you to hear it from me directly." The same call with James. And then Monica. No bitterness, no recruitment pitch. Just honesty. By noon, I had 11 new messages on my phone. By 2 p.m., Nina texted me from a personal number. "Gavin's panicking. Clients are asking questions he can't answer. Howard just scheduled an emergency meeting." I didn't smile. But I did understand something for the first time in a long while. It wasn't just about the loss of a job. It was about how easily people forget what holds a structure together until it starts to crack. And sometimes all it takes is removing one beam. There's something eerie about being at the center of a storm you don't have to create. I didn't send any angry emails, didn't post on LinkedIn. I didn't call reporters or drop hints to mutual clients. I simply informed the 3 people who mattered most and waited. And the current moved faster than I imagined. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 4 more clients had reached out saying they'd heard I'd left. One of them, Victor Ramos, a longtime contact from Keystone Manufacturing, texted simply, "Wherever you're headed, that's where we're going too." That afternoon, I got a call I'd been expecting. It wasn't from Gavin. It was from Howard Langston himself. "Ethan," he said, trying to sound calm, "we need to talk about your transition. Several clients are expressing concern." I let it go to voicemail, because by then I had already moved on mentally and legally. 2 hours earlier, I'd sat across from David Kwan, an employment attorney with sharp eyes and a reputation for discretion. I'd helped his son-in-law secure a commercial loan 3 years ago, and now he was helping me. After reviewing my paperwork, David leaned back. "They can't stop you from working. You weren't under a non-solicit, and the non-compete is void after termination without cause. But they'll try to make your clients second-guess following you." I nodded. "That won't be enough." "No," he said. "It won't, especially not if you're calm and clean about this." David drew up a memo I could send to any clients who requested clarity, one that made no accusations but made my position clear. I wouldn't initiate contact. I wouldn't disparage. I wouldn't pursue any contracts actively. But if clients reached out to me, I had every right to respond. That was enough. By 5:30 p.m., I got a text from Logan Barrett. "Just had a call with Orion. Gavin and that new girl tried to explain continuity. Then they offered a 10% discount if we renewed early. And told them we'd think about it. Then sent in notice of termination an hour later. Reason: change in relationship oversight." I stared at the screen, unreadable emotions rushing through me. Logan wasn't just a client. He was a signal. If Barrett Corp walked, others would follow. And they did. Holloway Ventures, Carter Group, and Keystone all sent notice by midnight. Total value of terminated contracts, $5.1 million. The foundation was shaking, and I hadn't lifted a hammer. The next morning, I received an unexpected call. "Ethan Ward." "Yes. My name is Liam Cross. I'm managing partner at Vanguard Partners. I understand you're recently available." He didn't have to say how he knew. In this industry, news travels faster than strategy decks. "I'm listening." "We've admired your client retention numbers for a while. Some of your former clients have spoken highly of you. We'd like to offer you a seat on our executive committee. Full autonomy over your accounts. Profit-sharing structure. 6-figure signing bonus. And the start date. How's tomorrow sound?" I didn't need time to think. Not because I was desperate, but because I was done waiting for people to value what I built after they'd thrown it away. I accepted. That night, Gavin texted me. "Board approved a retention offer. Full salary for 6 months. Stock options. Consulting fees if you help transition the accounts." I stared at the message and thought of the 11 years I gave them. The birthdays missed, the weekends skipped, the silent sacrifices. I didn't reply. Instead, I went upstairs, opened the drawer of Clara's nightstand, and pulled out a framed photo. It was from a cabin trip 4 years ago. Just the 3 of us, snow boots, flushed cheeks, untouched phones. I'd almost canceled that weekend because of a client who needed urgent numbers by Monday. I delivered both. The numbers and the memories. But one of them mattered more now. 3 days into my new role at Vanguard, Nina called again. She sounded tense. "Ethan, there's something you should know. It wasn't just Gavin pushing you out. There's more to this." I waited. Orion's been in talks with Viridian Capital for months. They're trying to sell the firm. But Viridian had conditions. They wanted to strip out account executives tied too closely to client loyalty. They didn't want risk. They wanted plug-and-play assets. That was the missing piece. It wasn't incompetence, it was orchestration. I wasn't a liability because I was underperforming. I was a liability because my relationships were too strong, too personal, not scalable. They needed me out so they could convince Viridian that the revenue would stay without me. And now that lie was unraveling. Nina continued. Viridian's pulled back. Without those clients, the deal doesn't make sense. Howard's furious. The board's in chaos. I didn't say anything, because the truth was still settling in my stomach like cold steel. They hadn't just fired me. They'd tried to erase me. Later that night, I called Logan. Quick question, I asked. Did anyone from Orion ever introduce you to someone from Viridian? Maybe under another title, strategic advisor or something like that? A pause. Actually, yes. A guy named Stephen Thomas. Sat in on our last quarterly review. Asked a lot of questions. Didn't say much. Anyone else? He hesitated. Now that you mention it, Carter Group had someone too. Different name, same vibe. By the next morning, I'd confirmed 6 clients had been approached by people linked to Viridian, all under soft titles like market specialist or industry analyst. None of them were introduced as acquisition scouts, and all of them were quietly digging for cracks in relationships I'd built over a decade. It was betrayal, not loud, not obvious, but cold, methodical. They weren't preparing to replace me because I was weak. They were preparing because I was the strongest link, and they wanted to unhook it before anyone noticed. I opened my inbox and found another message from Howard. Can we talk, just you and me? No lawyers. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted revenge, but because some silence is earned. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about identity. About pride. About years of standing quietly at the back of the room and letting the numbers speak, only to be told that what you built was now a threat to their bottom line. They wanted assets, but I gave them relationships. And relationships don't transfer. They walk. You never really know how far something spreads until you stop chasing it. By the end of my first full week at Vanguard Partners, the ripple had become a wave. 11 clients had followed me, not because I asked them to, because they understood the difference between being served and being managed. The industry was humming with news. I hadn't posted a thing, but still I got messages like, "Heard you landed well. We've been waiting for you to resurface. If you're building again, we'd like to be part of it." One afternoon, Victor Ramos from Keystone called. "I just had to say, the team you built, the way you handled our expansions during COVID, no one's forgotten that. You never sold us anything. You just made us feel like someone gave a damn." That line stuck with me. Because for years, that's exactly what I'd done, gave a damn, even when it cost me time, weekends, recognition. And now it was giving back in a way I never expected. Meanwhile, back at Orion, things weren't just unraveling. They were collapsing. Nina sent me another message. Viridian deal is officially dead. They backed out this morning. Said too much of the revenue was personality dependent. Board is spinning. I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the news. But I did close my office door and sit quietly for a while. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was clarity. They hadn't built something I could grow in. They'd built something I could carry, and the moment I stepped away, it broke under its own weight. That weekend, I sat down with Vanguard's legal and finance teams to go over the onboarding documents. We had already signed $6.3 million in new annual revenue, all from former Orion clients. The room was quiet as the numbers settled on the screen. Then Liam Cross, the managing partner, said something that made everyone pause. "This is the best acquisition we've ever made. And we didn't even buy a company to get it." There was polite laughter. But I didn't laugh, because this wasn't about winning. It was about proving what had always been true. You can't fake relationships. You can't manufacture trust. You either build it or you lose to the ones who do. A few days later, I received an invitation. It was from the organizers of the Southeast Financial Leadership Forum, a major industry event held annually in Charleston. Topic: Client loyalty in a transactional market. The irony wasn't lost on me. Howard and most of the Orion executive team never missed that conference. Gavin, too, if he still had a job. I stared at the email for a long time. I didn't need the spotlight. I wasn't chasing attention. But something told me this was the right time. And the right room. I replied, confirmed, happy to contribute. I spent the next few weeks working late with Vanguard's analysts. We didn't prepare slides full of slogans or brand fluff. We built a report. Real data. Real metrics. A story told in numbers, not noise. Client service wait times down 47%. Implementation costs down 29%. Satisfaction scores up 22 points across the board. All in under 3 months. Why? Because we had structure. Because we had freedom. Because we had clarity on what mattered. Because I didn't have to ask permission to care about a client anymore. The night before the event, I had dinner with Clara. We'd made it a tradition dinner before every big presentation. She poured wine, leaned across the table, and asked, "Are you ready?" "Yeah," I said. She studied my face. "But are you good?" It was a different question. I thought about it. About the silence after being fired. About the anger I never showed. About the years I gave, and the simple fact that none of the people who cut me loose ever really knew what I was doing for them. "I'm good," I said finally, "because I'm not carrying it anymore." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Sometimes that's all you need to know you're home again. The next morning, I stepped into the hotel ballroom in Charleston. I spotted Howard Langston almost instantly huddled near the back with two men I didn't recognize. His face tightened when he saw me. I nodded politely. He looked away. The panel began with a moderator teeing up generic questions about market trends and digital automation. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make it personal. I just said, in a world where automation dominates, personal accountability becomes the rarest commodity. A few heads nodded. Too many firms confuse client relationships with company property. But trust isn't transferable. It doesn't sit on a balance sheet. It lives in conversations, in crises, in the quiet ways people show up. I presented the data from Vanguard. No slides about disruption, no buzzwords. Just what happened when you empower the people your clients actually trust. Then I paused. Let it breathe. And closed with, if you treat your relationship managers as interchangeable, your clients will eventually show you how wrong that assumption is. During Q&A, a young analyst raised her hand. Isn't what happened between you and your previous firm exactly the risk that companies fear? That clients become loyal to people, not institutions. I looked at her and said, that's a fair question, but here's the thing. Clients didn't follow me out of loyalty. They followed because they knew their needs would be better met. That's not a threat. That's a sign your system failed them. There was a long silence, and then applause. Not wild, not theatrical, but solid, real. By the end of the day, Vanguard had 5 new letters of intent. And by the end of the week, 2 of them had converted into contracts worth nearly $2.7 million per year. I didn't announce it, didn't boast, but the market had spoken. And in this business, that's the only voice that ever matters. That Friday evening, as I walked into my office to shut things down for the weekend, my assistant handed me an envelope. No return address, she said. Inside was a note handwritten. You were right. I put transaction above relationship, and it cost us everything. If you're ever willing, I'd appreciate the chance to apologize in person. Howard. I folded the note and slid it into my desk. Not to forget. Not to forgive just yet. But because some moments need time. And not every apology needs to be answered immediately. Some just need to be heard. I kept Howard's note. Not because I needed the apology and not because I planned to respond, but because sometimes the weight of those words written too late, said too quietly, reminds you how far you've come. It stayed in the drawer of my desk at Vanguard, tucked beneath a folder marked New Partnership, Final Review. That folder held something far more important than an apology. It held the future I was building on my own terms. 6 months had passed since I walked out of Orion Strategies. And in that time, my portfolio at Vanguard had grown to over $19.4 million in annual revenue. Not just from legacy clients who followed me, but from new ones who saw the shift, saw the clarity, and saw the proof that when service is built on trust, not hierarchy, results follow. It wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about what we were doing differently. Every account executive on my team had a voice. They weren't fighting for recognition in a room full of posturing suits. They were solving problems with autonomy, support, and shared ownership. We even restructured compensation. Profit sharing wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who helped build something real. That was my first act when I signed the final page in that partnership agreement. Because I wasn't just accepting a new title. I was closing a chapter that once tried to write me out of my own story. But even then, the past had a way of echoing. Late one Thursday, I got a message from Nina Wells, my former assistant at Orion. Ethan just wanted you to know Gavin's gone. Let go last week. No official statement, just pursuing other opportunities. I read it twice, then set my phone down. No satisfaction, no relief. Just that familiar stillness that comes when the truth catches up to the noise. They brought him in to replace me. But the numbers never followed. Because loyalty doesn't migrate by force. It walks freely, and only toward those who earn it. 3 days later, I got an email from Carmen Patel, the young woman Gavin once positioned to shadow me without warning, without explanation. Hi, Ethan. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I've been let go, along with most of the Orion sales team. If you're hiring, I'd love to be considered. I know how this might sound, but I just want to do work that actually means something again. I forwarded it to HR at Vanguard, with a simple note worth interviewing. Not her fault. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It rarely starts with the people who carry it out. It starts higher, quieter, in rooms where decisions are made with charts, not context. People like Carmen get used as pawns, just like I once was. The only difference, I lived long enough to get out before I became collateral. That same week, I met with the executive committees at Vanguard. We reviewed our quarterly data, discussed expansion strategy, and finalized a new initiative to mentor rising relationship managers across our regional offices. At the end of the meeting, Liam Cross raised his glass to the most impactful hire we've made in years and the smartest revenge story I've ever seen, even though you never called it that. There was some laughter, but I stayed quiet because I never wanted revenge. What I wanted was respect, autonomy, integrity. What I wanted was to be trusted as much as the clients had always trusted me. That Friday evening, I drove past Orion's old headquarters. The sign was gone. A small construction crew was taking down the lettering that once stretched across that glass facade like a promise. Now it was just empty space. I didn't stop, didn't take a picture. I just looked once and kept driving. Some things aren't meant to be revisited. Not out of anger, but because you've simply outgrown the rooms that once tried to contain you. When I got home, Claire was waiting on the porch. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a framed quote she'd had made for me, the same one I'd seen on her desk 100 times but never paid close attention to. The best revenge is massive success. I turned it over in my hands, then placed it face down on my credenza. Not because it wasn't true, but because that story was over. Later that night, our daughter asked if I was coming to her music recital. It was the first time she didn't ask with hesitation in her voice. She already knew the answer. Yes, I said. I'll be there front row. And I was. For the first time in years, I wasn't glued to my phone. I wasn't thinking about travel schedules or quarterly projections. I was just there, watching her smile, listening to her play, and realizing that while I'd lost one version of success, I'd finally stepped into one that felt real. The next morning, I made a decision I'd put off for too long. I pulled out my calendar and sent a message to Howard Langston. Let's have that coffee. He replied within minutes. We met at a quiet cafe far from the towering buildings and tinted glass of our old world. He looked smaller now, not physically, but in presence. There was a humility in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He extended his hand. Thanks for meeting. I shook it, sat down. We didn't make small talk. Instead, he got straight to it. I didn't see it. What you carried, what you built, what we were risking when we pushed you out. I let him speak. He continued, it wasn't just business, it was convenience. We thought we could standardize what was never meant to be standardized. He paused. I thought you were replaceable. I didn't reply right away. Then I said, you didn't just lose a revenue stream, Howard. You lost the bridge between your company and the people who trusted it. He nodded. And for once, he didn't try to explain it away. There was no legal pitch, no offer to return, just quiet regret. I know, he said. And in that moment, I believed him. When I left that coffee shop, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt light. Like the last weight I'd been carrying had finally been put down. It wasn't a dramatic ending. There was no applause. Just the sound of a door closing gently behind me, and the understanding that this story, for all its pain, had given me the one thing I never knew I needed. Myself. Exactly 1 year to the day after Gavin Reyes slid the termination papers across that conference table, I signed a document of my own. It wasn't a severance agreement. It wasn't an exit clause. It was a partnership contract. One that made me a full equity partner at Vanguard Partners with full control over the accounts I'd brought, and a long-term stake in the future we were now shaping together. The final number in my client portfolio, just over $20 million in annual revenue. And every dollar was built on the foundation Gavin and the board at Orion had once considered too relationship dependent. They were right. And that was the point. I closed the manila folder and looked out across the Charlotte skyline from my office. Same city, same buildings. But everything felt different. Because this time it belonged to me. Not just the title. Not just the corner office. but the clarity, the peace, the boundaries I never used to believe I deserved. Clara stepped into the office just as I was taking my first deep breath. She was holding 2 cups of coffee, the kind she knew I liked on days like this, quiet, bittersweet ones. "It's signed?" she asked, handing me a cup. I nodded. "It's official." She studied my face. "You don't look as happy as I expected." I sat back, let the silence settle for a beat. "It's not that I'm not happy," I said. "It's just, I keep thinking about Orion, about how long I stayed believing I was building something that would protect us." Clara leaned forward. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I'm building something that can't be taken away. Not unless I hand it over." That afternoon, I reviewed onboarding proposals for 3 new account executives. They were strong candidates. Young, hungry, but grounded. I'd made it clear to HR, they weren't just being hired to produce numbers. They were being invited to build something. Each contract included a profit-sharing clause, not just commissions, but real ownership of their accounts. Because I refused to repeat the cycle I'd survived. No one would pour themselves into this place and wake up one day to find themselves erased. That would be my legacy. Not revenge, not retribution. Reconstruction. As I left for the evening, I passed the framed quote Clara had given me months ago. "The best revenge is massive success." This time I picked it up, turned it over, and smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I finally understood that it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving myself right. That night, we attended our daughter's band performance at her school. I sat next to Clara, phone off, eyes forward, and a smile I didn't even notice forming. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it's perfect. But because it was mine. The kind of night I used to miss, used to postpone, used to tell myself I'd make up for. You don't get those back. But you can choose differently from now on. And that's exactly what I'd done. The next morning, I woke up to a news alert on my phone. Orion Strategies announces CEO transition. Amid ongoing revenue struggles, Howard Langston has stepped down. Sources cite client attrition and failed acquisition efforts as primary factors. I sat with the headline for a moment, then set the phone aside without reading the rest. Some victories don't need an audience. Some justice doesn't need gloating. It just needs time and truth. Later that week, as I wrapped up final reports for Q4, my assistant buzzed me. "Hey, Ethan, a courier dropped something off for you." Handwritten envelope. It was addressed in blocky letters I recognized immediately. Gavin Reyes. Inside was a single note. No letterhead, no excuses, just 4 lines. I misunderstood what leadership meant. I thought I was building a team, but I was managing numbers. You were right, I wasn't. I read it twice, then folded the paper and placed it with Howard's note in the drawer. I didn't need anything from Gavin anymore. But even now, part of me appreciated the silence that followed. Some people fall apart when power slips away. Others learn. And maybe, just maybe, Gavin would become the second kind. 1 week later, I received a call from Carmen Patel. She had been hired as an account executive at Vanguard, not by me, but by another partner who'd reviewed her file and seen potential. She wanted to meet. We sat in the conference room overlooking the downtown square. She was nervous but direct. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for passing along my name, but for not holding any of that against me. Back then, I didn't even know what was happening." I smiled. "I know, none of that was your fault." She hesitated. "You think I can do this? I mean, what you do?" I nodded slowly. "If you focus on the people, not the pitches, you'll do better than most." She exhaled, grateful. And I realized in that moment that one of the greatest things we can do after surviving betrayal is become the kind of leader we once needed. A few weeks later, I was invited back to the Southeast Forum not as a guest, but as a keynote speaker. The panel title, Trust Beyond the Transaction, Rebuilding the Relationship Model in Corporate Finance. I stood on that stage, looked out over a crowd of professionals, many of whom had seen what happened the year before, and I told them the truth about what happened to me, about what I built, about how I learned the hard way that loyalty without protection becomes a leash, and that integrity without clarity is just sacrifice. But I also told them this, that you can begin again, that it's never too late to build something worthy of your time, your effort, your name, and that sometimes the most painful endings are just a shift in direction. That evening, as I returned home, Clara met me at the door. I kissed her forehead, wrapped an arm around her, and said, "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." And I meant it. Every word. Because what began as a quiet dismissal in a polished boardroom had become the most important revelation of my life. That the value of what we build isn't just in what we produce. It's in who we become after we've been forced to start over.